They said he was unbreakable. They said Ernest Hemingway was a man carved out of war smoke, whiskey, and unshakable courage. But what no one knew, not until the end, was that the most masculine writer in American history spent his final years terrified of a secret that he believed would destroy everything he had ever written, everything he had ever stood for, and everything the world had worshipped about him. Just weeks before his death, Hemingway whispered something to a close friend that the family tried to bury for decades. It was a confession wrapped in paranoia, memory loss, and the slow collapse of a mind that had once survived bullets, plane crashes, and heartbreaks. "They're watching me," he said. "They're following me. They want my manuscripts. They want me gone." Those were the last coherent words the friend ever heard from him. But where did this fear come from? Why would a Nobel Prize-winning giant, whose life was already drenched in myth, believe he was being hunted? And why did the FBI files released years later reveal that his fear might not have been madness at all? This is the crack in the Hemingway legend, the fracture beneath the rugged image, the haunting truth that no school biography ever shows. The war hero with nightmares that never ended, the hunter who could not outrun himself, the icon whose public bravado hid a private unraveling. Tonight, we step into the world behind the myth, the world where Hemingway's swagger was only a mask, where every triumph hid a wound, and where every masterpiece was born from a pain he never escaped. This is not just a story of a writer. It is a story of a man who lived too intensely, loved too fiercely, fought too violently, and in the end, paid the price for all of it. Ernest Miller Hemingway entered the world in 1899 in a quiet suburb of Oak Park, Illinois, a place his later self would have described as a town of wide lawns and narrow minds. No one looking at the polite, clean, middle-class boy could have predicted the force he would eventually become. Yet even as a child, Hemingway carried contradictions inside him, as if two people were fighting for the right to grow into one body. He learned strict discipline from his father, a physician who taught him to hunt and fish with precision, and he inherited artistic sensitivity from his mother, a woman passionate about music and often accused of trying to mold her children into reflections of herself. These tensions would follow Hemingway for the rest of his life, between masculinity and fragility, force and fear, control and collapse. By the time he volunteered as an ambulance driver in World War I at age 18, Hemingway had already been shaped by a culture that worshipped stoicism. But the trenches in Italy carved something deeper into him, a wound that would never close. He was badly injured, hit by mortar fire that left him with shrapnel in his legs and a trauma that shaped every story he would later write. The romanticized version says he emerged braver. The truth is more complicated. He emerged haunted. He emerged with insomnia, panic episodes, and a belief that death hovered only an inch away from every man. These early cracks formed the foundation of the legend. They also foreshadowed the darkness that would later swallow him whole. Through the 1920s, Hemingway's life accelerated at a speed that seemed almost unnatural. He arrived in Paris with little money, a strong jawline, and a hunger that intimidated even the artists around him. Gertrude Stein, Ezra Pound, M.F., Scott Fitzgerald, they all recognized something volatile and electric in him. He wasn't there just to write. He was there to conquer. He studied rhythm like a soldier preparing for battle. He cut sentences until they bled. He believed every word should be true, stripped of ornament, free of lies. His early masterpieces, The Sun Also Rises, A Farewell to Arms, turned him into the literary voice of a generation broken by war. Paris adored him. The lost generation admired him. Women fell for him. Men envied him. But beneath the brilliance, there was something else stirring, a restlessness, a hunger for intensity, a desire to live life at the edge, just to feel alive. The Hemingway code of courage, dignity, and facing danger head-on was more than a literary philosophy. It was a way to silence his own fear, a way to drown out the nightmares that never left him, a way to outrun the ghosts that followed him from the trenches. The world saw a fearless adventurer, bullfighting rings in Spain, safaris in Africa, deep-sea fishing in Cuba. But those who stood close enough saw the truth, a man who was always at war with himself. He drank not for pleasure, but for quiet. He wrote not for glory, but to escape. He loved fiercely, yet destroyed relationships with the same force, and with every new success. The pressure grew heavier. By the time he won the Pulitzer Prize for The Old Man and the Sea, the image of Ernest Hemingway, the symbol of American masculinity, had become a burden he could no longer carry. The world expected him to be heroic. He was expected to be invincible. Even his own friends admitted later that they feared disappointing the legend more than the man. The 1950s marked the beginning of the unraveling. Multiple plane crashes in Africa left him with concussions, chronic pain, liver damage, and possibly undiagnosed traumatic brain injury. His memory began to slip. He couldn't recall basic words. He struggled to write sentences he once could shape effortlessly. And with the decline of his health came the rise of a new fear, a fear that someone was watching him, tracking him, trying to steal or sabotage his manuscripts. At first, his paranoia seemed like the side effect of trauma, but as history would later reveal, the FBI was watching Hemingway, not years later, but during his lifetime. The suspicion wasn't entirely imagined, yet at the time, no one believed him. Doctors dismissed his stories. Friends thought they were hallucinations. Family members tried to calm him without knowing what to say. The man who had defined courage for millions was falling apart, piece by fragile piece, and the world had no idea. Hemingway hid his decline behind a mask of bravado, jokes, and exaggerated hunting stories. He tried to resurrect the old version of himself, but the truth was rapidly catching up to him. The very identity he had built, strong, disciplined, fearless, was slipping away. And there, in that quiet devastation, the real scandal begins to emerge. The story the world rarely hears. The part where Hemingway's paranoia intersects with real government surveillance, where his mental collapse intersects with a lifetime of buried trauma, where his legend begins to fracture under secrets no one was supposed to uncover. Hemingway's rise had always been dramatic, but his fall was something far more haunting. It didn't begin with a single event, not a plane crash, not a failed book, not even the loss of friends. It began with the slow erosion of identity, as if time itself were peeling away the layers he had so carefully built. He had always believed in the code. A man must endure pain with dignity, face danger with calm, and never let the world see fear. But by the mid-1950s, the Hemingway Code was turning against him. The injuries from the double plane crash in Africa left him with agonizing headaches, blurred vision, and a trembling in his hands that terrified him more than any charging bull ever had. Writing, the one thing that had always given him control, had become a battlefield he no longer knew how to navigate. In private letters from that period, Hemingway admitted that he could no longer get the words right. Sentences slipped away from him like fish he could no longer catch. The man whose prose had once been the cleanest in America now stared helplessly at pages that refused to obey him. And then came the incident in late 1959, the first sign of the paranoia that would soon consume him. While living in Cuba, Hemingway became convinced that the FBI was monitoring his mail, tapping his phone, and following him around Havana. Friends insisted he was imagining things. Even his wife, Mary Welsh, thought it was the alcohol talking. He spoke in fragments, in whispers, as if afraid the walls had grown ears. "They want to seize my papers," he muttered to a journalist friend. "They want to bury me before I can speak." His unease intensified after the Cuban Revolution. Castro admired him publicly, but Hemingway believed he was being watched from every angle by the new Cuban regime, by American intelligence agencies, even by people he had once trusted. He refused to send certain manuscripts out of the country. He wrote drafts, sealed them, hid them, moved them again, and hid them once more. It wasn't long before his behavior shifted from caution to obsession. He tracked strangers on the street. He watched cars outside the Finca Vigia with binoculars. He warned visitors not to mention certain names inside the house. The once larger-than-life adventurer now lived like a man guarding something the world was trying to steal. At the same time, his physical health was deteriorating. Years of heavy drinking had ravaged his liver. His eyesight failed him during fishing trips. He couldn't carry his beloved rifles without feeling a tremor in his arms. He tried to write through the pain and panic, but every attempt only reminded him of what he was losing. And then came the escalation that would push him past the point of return. In 1960, his friends and family made a decision they believed was necessary. They admitted Hemingway to the Mayo Clinic. The official explanation was high blood pressure and depression. The truth was far more alarming. Hemingway believed he was being taken there to be interrogated or silenced. He begged them to let him go back home. He cried in the hospital hallway, insisting that they were coming for him. The doctors administered electroconvulsive therapy, multiple rounds, intense and frequent. The treatment erased memories, softened edges, and shattered whatever creative rhythm he still had left. Notes from the clinic reveal the brutal aftermath. Hemingway pacing in circles, unable to recognize close friends, unable to write even a single page without collapsing in frustration. One nurse later admitted he was terrified. He kept saying that they were watching him, that the next shock would erase his life's work. The contrast between Hemingway the icon and Hemingway the patient was almost unbearable. The man the world had cheered for decades was now reduced to a trembling shadow of himself, asking why the words he had once commanded with absolute authority no longer appeared. When he returned home to Ketchum, Idaho, he tried to rebuild. He sat at his typewriter every morning, just as he always had, but the sentences came out fragmented. Some days, he couldn't even turn the machine on. His wife hid the ammunition from the house, hiding it from the man who had faced lions, machine guns, and bulls, but could not fight the despair in his own mind. The final months of Hemingway's life were marked by a heartbreaking cycle, attempting to be himself, failing, and falling deeper into paranoia. He believed the government wanted to destroy his reputation. He believed agents had infiltrated his circle. He believed every movement was being tracked. No one could convince him otherwise, because, as it would later turn out, some of what he feared was rooted in a chilling truth. His rise had been meteoric, but his fall was quiet, secret, almost suffocating. The strong lines of his legend remained, but inside them, the man had already collapsed. And in that silence, in that hidden decline, the darkest truth of Hemingway's life was about to surface, a truth no one close to him fully understood until long after his death. The darkest truth behind Ernest Hemingway's final years did not emerge from rumor, nor from a biographer's imagination, nor from family speculation. It emerged from government files, actual FBI surveillance documents released decades after his death. For years, people believed Hemingway's paranoia was nothing more than the unraveling of a damaged mind. But the truth is far more unsettling. Hemingway was being watched. In the late 1940s and throughout the 1950s, Edgar Hoover's FBI kept a file on him, tracking his political associations, his friendships with Cuban officials, his connections with anti-fascist groups, and even monitoring his movements. The file wasn't enormous, but it was enough to confirm that Hemingway's fears were not born from delusion alone. Some were real shadows, standing just out of sight, documenting him quietly. But Hemingway never lived long enough to see those files. To him, the fear felt like madness. To the world, it appeared as mental collapse. To history, it would soon become one of the most tragic ironies in American literary lore. In his final weeks, Hemingway told a close friend, "They've tailed me for years." The friend dismissed it as exhaustion, but the newly unsealed documents, released in the late 1980s, proved that the FBI had indeed questioned his associates in Cuba, monitored his activities, and collected intel about him. This revelation retroactively shattered the narrative that Hemingway was simply slipping into irrationality. The line between paranoia and reality in his life had been blurred long before his mind began to crumble. This is where the emotional weight of the story deepens. Imagine being Hemingway, wounded by war, battered by trauma, aging prematurely from adrenaline and alcohol, terrified of losing the words that once electrified the world. Add to that a lifetime of performing masculinity, of playing the role of Ernest Hemingway, the man everyone expected to be fearless, brilliant, unstoppable. Behind that facade, he fought silent enemies, depression, brain injuries, guilt, failed marriages, and the impossible pressure to remain the legend he had created. In the end, his inner world was collapsing even as the outer world quietly confirmed his suspicions. Friends from those final years remember the fragmentation vividly. One recalled Hemingway suddenly stopping mid-sentence during breakfast and whispering, "Did you hear that?" Another said he refused to leave the house on certain days because he believed someone had been checking the property line. Mary, his wife, tried to soothe him, but she too admitted later that she never fully understood the scale of his dread. And then there was the writing, the most painful casualty of all. Hemingway once said that writing was the one thing he trusted more than his own heartbeat. To create a single true sentence, he believed, was to stand triumphantly against the chaos of the world. But in his final months, that ability slipped through his fingers. Manuscripts that should have been masterpieces remained half-formed. Paragraphs that would have held the power of earlier decades arrived brittle or confused. He called it the death of the ability. And to a man whose soul was tied to craft, it was a devastation greater than physical illness. The decline reached its climax after the electroshock treatments. They were meant to stabilize him, but instead, they stripped him of memory and rhythm. A doctor later claimed Hemingway had told him, with tears in his eyes, "You have ruined me. You have killed my words." And then, on the quiet morning of July 2nd, 1961, he made the decision he believed was the only one left in his control. He walked into the entryway of his Idaho home, took his favorite shotgun, a weapon he had cleaned hundreds of times, and ended the story himself. The world was told it was an accident. Those closest to him knew otherwise. In the days after his death, letters surfaced, notes from friends, journal fragments. All of them painted the image of a man who had lived at such an intense flame that his own brilliance eventually consumed him. Public reaction ranged from shock to sorrow to speculation. Newspapers celebrated the legend. Literary communities mourned the loss of a titan. But under the surface, the whispers began. Was it the paranoia, the injuries, the government surveillance, the weight of fame, the fading of genius? Or was it the simple truth Hemingway had always known, that a life lived in extremes could never end quietly? The media softened the story for the public, but in private, those who had known Hemingway intimately felt a mix of guilt, grief, and awe. Many believed they had failed him. Others believed no one could have saved him. But everyone agreed on one thing. Ernest Hemingway did not die as the invincible hero the world worshipped. He died as Ernest, the man who had carried too many battles inside him. When we look back at the life of Ernest Hemingway, it becomes impossible to separate the legend from the man. The world remembers him as the fearless adventurer, the hunter, the war correspondent, the fisherman who stared down storms and danger with a grin. But here, on this channel, where we explore the cracks behind greatness, we must acknowledge something deeper and far more human. Hemingway was not invincible. He was not the unbreakable giant his public image demanded. He was a man made of fire and fragility, brilliance and scars, triumph and terror. Our perspective is simple. Hemingway's legacy is built as much on his masterpieces as on the battles he never stopped fighting. His greatest works were not shaped by the mythic bravery people admired, but by the wounds that haunted him. The trauma from the war, the pressure of fame, the self-imposed mask of masculinity, the lifelong struggle with mental illness, and in his final years, the fear, half imagined, half real, that the world was closing in on him. It is easy to romanticize Hemingway. Many do. They see the rugged photos, the exotic travels, the trophies from hunts and fishing expeditions, the literary accolades. But what is harder to face is the fragile, aching figure behind all that bravado. A man who wanted to write the truest sentence but feared his mind was betraying him. A man who lived boldly because the quiet moments frightened him. A man who built an identity so large that eventually it crushed him. We believe that to understand Hemingway fully is to accept both sides of him, the fearless and the frightened, the genius and the wounded. His contributions to literature are undeniable. He changed the rhythm of American prose. He stripped language down to its bones and taught writers that truth could be simple, sharp, and devastating. His influence stretches through every minimalist writer who came after him. His stories still resonate because they are not about heroes. They are about humans searching for dignity in a violent, unpredictable world. But his scandals, his dark spirals, his destructive habits, and his paranoia also tell a story that warns us about the myth of invincibility, about the cost of suppressing vulnerability, about the dangers of creating a public persona too large for any real person to sustain. In Hemingway's case, the myth became a prison. What stands out most, at least to us, is how deeply misunderstood he was. People labeled his paranoia as madness, but history later revealed that some of it was grounded in reality. People mocked his machismo, but much of it was a shield to hide emotional pain he never felt safe expressing. People glorified his bravery, yet he himself often confessed that courage was not fearlessness. It was carrying on despite fear. So we ask you, the audience, how do you see Hemingway now? Do you see him as the flawed genius, the tragic hero, the victim of fame and his own legend, or as a man who lived too intensely for his own survival? What strikes you most about his story? The literary brilliance, the public persona, or the heartbreaking unraveling beneath it? And do you think the world today treats its icons any differently? Or do we still demand perfection from people who are struggling in ways we cannot see? Perhaps that is why Hemingway still fascinates us. He forces us to confront a truth we often avoid. Genius does not protect anyone from suffering. In fact, it may amplify it. Hemingway lived loudly, loved recklessly, created fearlessly, but he also paid a heavy price for carrying the weight of his own myth. His life is not simply a cautionary tale. It is a reminder that behind every legend is a human being trying to survive themselves. In the end, what remains of Ernest Hemingway is not the scandal, not the paranoia, not even the tragedy of his final decision. What lingers, softly, like smoke after the gunshot, is the echo of a life lived at an intensity few can imagine. He burned with an urgency that shaped every line he wrote and every path he walked. And though that fire eventually consumed him, it also carved his legacy into the bones of literature forever. There is something haunting about Hemingway's story, something that stays with you after the final page, after the final sentence, after the final breath. Perhaps it is the contradiction, how a man who feared losing his words managed to give us some of the most unforgettable lines in modern writing. Perhaps it is the loneliness, how someone surrounded by fame, lovers, adventure, and accolades could still feel hunted by ghosts, some from the outside world, some from deep within himself. Or perhaps it is the simple truth that even giants have breaking points. His life teaches us that brilliance and brokenness often coexist, that courage is not a shield, but a fragile choice made over and over again, that genius is never clean or easy, and that the world often sees only the legend, while the man beneath it quietly struggles in ways no one ever notices until it is too late. Today, and when we read The Old Man and the Sea or A Farewell to Arms, we are not just reading novels. We are touching fragments of Hemingway himself, the pain, the discipline, the longing, the terror of losing the one thing that made his life make sense. There is a strange comfort in knowing that even as his world closed in on him, he still searched for truth in every sentence. He still fought to create meaning out of chaos. He still tried, even when trying hurt. And maybe that is why his story feels so human, so intimate, as if, by learning the cracks behind the legend, we are seeing more of ourselves reflected back. The fears we hide, the masks we wear, the battles we fight quietly when no one is watching. Some stories were never meant to be known, but now, you know the truth behind the myth. You know the shadows behind the hero. You know the fragile heartbeat behind the roar of a legend. And as you close this chapter, perhaps you'll carry with you a softer understanding of the people we place on pedestals and the secret storms they may be weathering alone. Hemingway is gone, but his legacy lives not in the myth, but in the raw, trembling humanity he left on every page.